Oh,
Dave,
how's it going, buddy?
it's going, man. We have a lot to cover this week, and
Yes.
I'm going to cover all of it because it's some exciting topics and then some not so exciting topics. So it has been 2 weeks since we've done it via being busy for the holidays and everything, but we're back at it. I don't think we've gone more than 2 weeks this season without doing a podcast. So
Yeah, we were
hopefully we can
pretty
keep that.
decent.
Yeah. Uh, so that being said, let's jump into a couple weeks back the game at Minnesota. This was probably one of the biggest games of the season for both the Vikings and for the Packers, just in terms of the division standings, where everybody was going to end up, especially for Minnesota's seeding situation. Were they going to be able to then go play Detroit and have a chance to go win the division? And we both of us thought it'd be a very tightly contested game going into it. I think so. I had it at a 2 point spread for the Vikings. You had it as a 3 point spread for the Packers. Um, it is not a score prediction that I wanted to win. I did win nonetheless, but it's not a feel good score prediction, unfortunately. Um, Part of being a realist is also being sad that you make the right predictions, I think, at times. But uh, but
Personally, I would rather go down with the ship, Kyle. I would rather go down with the ship than to be right about such things. You
I
get
know
one life to live.
a lot of the Packers shows, man, and like the radio stations and everything, like they never predict any other way than saying that Green Bay always is going to win. And while I understand it because you're promoting an organization, like I don't necessarily agree with like just saying you're going to win 100% of the time. Like that's not exactly what we're trying to do here. We're trying to give accurate predictions and
Yeah.
analysis and
I mean, you
like
got guys like Matt Schneidman, but he's actually not a Packer fan even. He's a Giants fan, so he just happens to work for Packer Media.
yeah.
I feel
So
like
we'll see.
it's hard to be a fan of the team and then predict against them too. It's just I don't know. It's a conflict of interest, and I'm very aware of it. But I will be conflicted with that interest because I will always go for my Green Bay Packers.
Well, we'll see if that holds true for this Philadelphia prediction at the end here. But uh, so not spending a crazy amount of time on Green Bay and Minnesota, or even the Green Bay and Chicago game, but specifically for Green Bay and Minnesota, I was just you know, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse with some of the stuff in this podcast at this point because we talked about it so much this season, but it's just trends for the Green Bay Packers, and that is that we tend to start slow and finish very fast. And this was a game in particular where we started off like I think it was 13-3 at the end of the first half, which is it's a it's a deficit, but it's not the worst deficit that you could be facing. Uh, in a half of football with the Minnesota Vikings, like, are you hoping for 3 points out of your offense that's been pretty high powered? No. And there was a key turnover right at the beginning of the game that kind of contributed to that. And I'm not saying one fumble by Josh Jacobs is the end of the world, but we definitely had momentum going on the first drive. It was down near the Vikings 40-yard line where we eventually fumbled and gave that ball right to them. And then with it, all the momentum it felt like for a while. So, um, there was definitely some controversy there right off the bat. They had to battle back from down the entire rest of the game, and they even get the ball back at halftime, and then it's 20-3 early in the third quarter. So the fact that they were able to close the gap and make this, even a 25-27 final score is still impressive. They have a lot of fight in them in the second half. I just think that it's really tough to get down by 17 points to a team that's that good, and then expect to get that you're going to be able to weasel your way back in and win a game. So I don't know if you have a different take on that. That's just kind of my initial take with the Vikings game is, you cannot get down early to very good football teams and expect to come back and win.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to really refute on that. I think that when you're playing a team like that, yeah, I agree 100%. You have to start fast or at least consistent The only thing I can really add to that is there was that failed fourth down conversion where it was like they were towards the goal line. They were definitely in the red zone. And instead of just taking the points, Matt LaFleur went for it and they weren't able to get it. I feel like that's kind of been when the Packers lose. That's kind of been the MO, even against the Lions or against the Vikings the last time. It's just missed points on the field. And when you think about the grand scheme of things, say the Packers do make that massive comeback, not saying they would have, everything could have aligned differently in that game, but you take those 3 points right then, now that game's looking at 28-27. And the Packers are a completely different team right now. We're probably going and playing the Los Angeles Rams in Arizona instead of playing the Philadelphia Eagles in Philly. But against good teams, you got to take the points. I feel like, yeah, you want to go in there, you want to score a touchdown, you want to be able to get ahead, and that's how you beat the good teams. But the way our defense is playing, for the most part, was decent. Not against that Vikings team; they got picked apart pretty bad. But overall, for the season, they do have to rely more on their defense. You need to take what you can get against good teams and just move forward. And I feel like that's kind of been an issue for the Packers, and probably will continue to be an issue for the Packers because I don't see them changing.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. And the other, I'm glad that you mentioned that that fourth down play because that's just not really typical of Matt LaFleur. I don't think to like gamble in those types of situations, and we saw that a couple times in the Minnesota game. Even the 2 point conversion was kind of a mystery to me. I'm not sure why they went for it there. With like, I mean, if you do not convert that 2 point conversion, you're down four
Yeah,
at the end of the game. Like, I really do not understand that decision. If you thought that you're going to have a shot, like to tie it and send it into overtime, like wouldn't you take that opportunity rather than gambling on if you're going to make it or not? Now, like I understand that most teams have a couple plays dialed up that they've worked on in practice that there are like their go-to plays. Should it be a 2 point conversion to win the game or something like that, or to tie it or whatever the case may be. And I trust Matt LaFleur in that respect. It was just surprising to see the gambles being taken in that game because it meant so much to both teams. So, like you said, I would like to have seen them take the points on the field goal instead of just, winging it on fourth down. And, I definitely would have opted to kick the extra point rather than, go for a 2 point conversion that puts you out of reach if you don't convert. But I mean, ultimately they did, which is great. It's just, I think that's a tough sell if you don't convert that. So
yeah. The only
the
thing
other,
I can think of with that one, I'm sorry to interrupt,
oh,
but
you're good.
yeah, the only thing I can think with that is the way their defense was getting picked apart by Minnesota. I think they didn't want to go for a tie at that point. You would almost rather just take the L instead of going into overtime, where ultimately they were probably going to drive down on you anyways if they got the ball. So I think that they'd rather just go for the win now, try to just pack it away and get done with. And I do kind of agree with him on that because that game, you had Kieran Valentine and Keyshawn Nixon just out there. They were looking tired. They were getting beat down. You had Jordan Addison. He was basically uncoverable. Jefferson really didn't go off big, but he's still another one. Made his plays when he needed to. Aaron Jones was hard to stop for them. There was just too many things coming at the Green Bay Packers defense where they really didn't have that impressive of a game. So I understand going forward there, but
Yeah, even Naylor had a really good game from Minnesota, which it's always like it always irritates me that like these guys that don't have big games against anyone else tend to always have huge games against the Green Bay Packers. Like, oh man, I'm not gonna remember the guy's name from Detroit. Who was the guy that like emerged from Detroit all of a sudden?
was it Tim Patrick?
Tim Patrick, yeah, that's right. Tim Patrick seemed to come out of like the shadows and just like absolutely go off versus Green Bay, and then he had like one other good game this season, and that's it. Like these guys come out of the woodwork against Green Bay for some reason. I don't know if it's division games or like what's on the line or that it means a little bit more, but these guys just emerge out of nowhere, have career games, and they're like, okay, we're cool with like disappearing back into the abyss. It just makes no sense.
It's just
But
like in Mr. Deeds where they just pop up the butler.
yeah, that's how it is, man. Like I don't understand how it works, but it's always inevitably versus Green Bay that like something like that will happen. So whatever. But The only other stat that I thought that was interesting from that game was that Green Bay only had one sack versus Minnesota, and that that's a tough thing, man. Like we talked about the defense all season, but the inability to get pressure on Sam Darnold or like any good quarterback, and like I think that at this point in the season, like it's undeniable that Sam Darnold is a good quarterback, especially in the Minnesota offense, and so like I think it's tough to not get pressure on a quarterback, but not to say that he wasn't pressured any other time, but very rarely in that game did I feel like we put any type of real pressure on him. We have one sack, and we're expecting him not to be able to throw to these very talented wide receivers downfield. Like I think that's a tough expectation, man. Like you can have great coverage, but eventually Justin Jefferson's getting open, or Addison's getting open, or even in this game Naylor's getting open. Like you're not going to be able to hold off that much talent on the offensive side of the ball forever. And so, like, if we're getting no pressure, and any ability to even stick a hand in the quarterback's face, like, I think that, like, that's a losing battle that you're fighting because Minnesota's defense is talented enough where they're going to be able to do that to us. So, and, they ended up with 3 sacks in the day, which is obviously better than 1. I'm not great at math, but I do know that. And so, and I didn't feel like their pressure was like relentless, but I felt like it was much better than what Green Bay has. And so I think that's a frustrating stat to look at because we've talked about it all season, and I've never been more excited, Dave, and I'm sure you're going to be happy to hear me say this. I've never been more excited for a draft than for this year because I feel like the offensive talent is there, and maybe there's some off-season acquisition that helps in the wide receiver category, depending on Christian Watson's status and all this other stuff, right? Like things to look at for help there. But I am very excited to see what they do with this defense in the offseason because it is a huge need right now, and there are some very, very talented players that Green Bay could end up snagging very early in this draft that would be great additions to this team. And, hopefully that is the case. Like, and that happens for Green Bay. And the organization is looking at it like you and I are looking at it, which is that we need some pretty substantial defensive help to be even more of contenders within the division.
One thing I could actually argue though, looking specifically, not talking the Bears game here, just talking for the Minnesota game, and looking at the Lions game and looking at the Eagles game earlier this year. When you look at those teams, they do have that number one just dominant wide receiver, and I know that that's a dead horse that's been beaten when Green Bay is. Do they have a true number one? Do they have a true number one? And you see at times in that Minnesota game, it did show that there were times where your guys just weren't getting open. That ended up hurting us. And I remember in this last draft, there were a couple of guys that I wanted, and one of them in particular was Mr. Brian Thompson Jr. And just looking and seeing what he's done for the Jaguars, even with Mac Jones as his quarterback, it does make me a little bit you know envious just seeing that, because knowing the fact of like what he could have done in our offense if they would have actually pulled the trigger and got a first round wide receiver. Even looking forward, I don't truly see that level of wide receiver in this draft. And there were a couple of guys that came out last year, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, but you just see Minnesota style. And, I think the Green Bay Packers philosophy would have been if they had Justin Jefferson, there's no way they're picking up Addison as well. Now, first round pick, they just wouldn't value that position to that amount. And just the delegation of resources, you see how it's paid off for Minnesota. You have Sam Darnold, who I don't think is anything special. And I know you can say it's undeniable, but I can still deny it. I think that he's still seeing ghosts out there. I think that maybe he had a little bit of holy water sprinkled on him, so the ghosts fled for a while. They came back against Detroit, but it's just one of those things where I think that if you invest in this offense a little bit more and put some pieces in there, I think that would really take us to the top, because we have a good offense now, a very good. I would say we're at the point, if we were to do, a tier list, because that's a thing that everybody loves nowadays. We're in that B tier. We're not sitting at the A tier. If you're telling me offensive weapons and firepower, I think that we're close. We're just not there yet. And that's the same thing for defense. But the difference is defense has been invested in for the last 20 years in Green Bay. You've had whole classes of defense just made by first round picks. And I don't know how Gutekunst goes forward with this draft. Like I said, that I don't see that number one wide receiver, but there are a couple of guys in place that I do see playing good players. So don't be surprised if, say, this year in the second round, all of a sudden you see another wide receiver. Maybe you see a tight end, and people will shake their head and go, "What's going on here? Why would you?" I think Gutekunst might be cooking up something in this draft coming.
Well, if that is the case, I would certainly be happy with it. You know that like there's been a few names over the last couple of years that I've been pretty high on the offensive side of the ball, and that's only selfishly, right? Because I watch a lot of college football as well, and I zone in or you see a couple of games during the season that are outside of our Wisconsin range, and you're like, man, that guy's really talented, right? And I think that all the time now, I see these guys come up and like I'm not necessarily like the guy who thinks, oh, like I'm not the delusional fan that thinks that, well, Green Bay should trade up to, 1 and 2 and snag, Travis Hunter or like something crazy like that, right? Like that's not what I think. Obviously there's a reason that those guys are going to get picked first and second or whatever they go in the draft. I don't expect Green Bay to like try to move up and do some weird astronomical thing to try to make those kind of moves happen within the organization. But I do expect them to sometimes take gambles on guys that are still on the board that maybe shouldn't be because we've had so much success with players like that in the past. So it's just, I wish the organization was a little bit more willing to take some gambles and get some guys into the locker room that are going to be guys that produce right now. And, I think that if you didn't think that, I don't think that you would draft who you draft anyways. But that Green Bay just has a tendency to stay away from the bigger names and to not necessarily go with who everybody else would go with. And sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. But I think that's the gamble that you take in the draft. So, and to be fair, completely fair to the Packers organization, like there's been a few guys that I've thought would do really, really well that are still trying to figure out their, like what their niche is in the NFL and if they're going to be a player who's going to make an impact or not. Hyatt, I thought was going to be awesome when he came into the NFL, and he's a giant. And I don't even know. I haven't seen his stat line this year, but like I don't know what he's doing.
Wide receiver out of Tennessee, drafted, I believe, in the third round to the Giants.
Yeah, so like I mean, people were really high on him on in that draft, and like I think he's been a little quiet, especially with Neighbors doing all the things that he's been doing. So like you can't always rely on the big name guys, and that proves it, right? Like there's probably a million other stories out there that are exactly like that, where it's like, oh man, how is this guy still here? But it's like, well, obviously people are seeing something that are moving him down a little bit further, and they might not want to take a gamble on him. And Green Bay is just one of those teams that I think like they're very set in their ways, and they know what they want in a draftee, and they're going to go after that. So there's nothing that you're going to like we're going to do as fans that are going to convince them. No amount of comments in the chat are going to make Green Bay change their mind. No amount of fan persuasion is going to make Gutekunst, suddenly draft differently. Like you just have to trust the process, and there's been some great things that have come out of the draft despite us being frustrated. So I'm just going to continue to trust the process and be happy. But I really want to see that Sawyer name in a freaking Green Bay jersey, man, because good God, that man is an animal.
You know who Sawyer reminds me of, and you might not remember. A couple years back, George Karlaftis was drafted by the Chiefs. They got him with the 32nd overall pick, and he was out of Purdue. Another guy, very high energy, very team oriented, very rah rah, and he's just come to the Chiefs, and he's just balled out. He's had a good career with the Chiefs. He's one of those guys. He gets the pressures when you need him in the biggest moments, and I see that with Sawyer out of Ohio State as well. Now, granted, do they go edge, maybe, but I mean, we have plenty of time to do, post draft after the season, postseason draft content. Believe me, I'm going to be talking everybody's ear off. I've already started watching far too much tape, and the Packers season isn't even done with. But yeah, and like you said with Hyatt too, I think one of the flaws. This isn't the Giants show, but it's with Hyatt especially. He just had that speed. He had that 4.3 speed with the body like Christian Watson, where he was tall,
I was gonna
lengthy, and
say
skinny.
with the length, right?
Yeah,
You're talking about like the wingspan and ability to have speed downfield for jump ball situations and all this other stuff. Yeah.
and that was the thing, was just the idea of having him in the red zone would have been nice, or even as a slot. But then the problem was he didn't have much lateral speed. And that's one thing I can say about Christian Watson, pre ACL tear. We don't know what he's going to be like when he comes back. But Christian Watson doesn't just have straight line speed. He has side to side speed too. The man looks so fast when he's on the field. The only issue is just his other tendencies of route running and his other tendencies of catching consistently. That's where there's been issues in the NFL. But it does feel a little bit dirty to say anything bad about Christian Watson at this point due to what happened against the Bears last week. Uh, you want to touch on that at all, or?
Yeah. Obviously, it's a non-contact injury. Whenever you see that in a game, you think to yourself, "Man, that's not good." Um, I think the Bears' reaction was kind of wholesome to see because they were on the field very concerned for him, calling the trainers over, praying for him. Even I think that's cool to see. From a sportsmanship aspect, like I think despite the game being in a tense spot or like it being very competitive, I think that um, that's a nice thing to see. It just sucks, man. Like there was a couple injuries in this game that happened that were very concerning. One was the elbow injury to Jordan Love. Seeing that be an issue or not know exactly what impact that would have on him going forward was a problem. And like while I believe in Malik Willis, I think it's a big ask to go in as a backup. And not that he hasn't produced or not that he couldn't, but I just think that's a big ask to go into Philly in a playoff game when you haven't played in a few weeks and just all of a sudden be the guy. So I think that's a tough thing. It looks like Jordan's starting as of right now. So is Jalen Hurts. So that's good. But as far as just circling back to Christian Watson, I mean, hopefully, he has a speedy recovery. He's been injured a lot, man, in his career. He just kind of made of glass. So it's unfortunate. It sucks. Uh, you never want to see that happen to a player on your team or even on the team that you're cheering against. But hopefully he's able to rehab it, come back a little bit better, or not. Like I don't know, man. Like I don't mean to be morbid about it as a fan of the game, right? Like I think a lot of times you're like fans think to themselves, well, like, oh, like for me, the fan, I hope he comes back as soon as possible, or like, I hope he gets back on the field because he's getting paid millions of dollars, and it's like, yeah, like they are, but like at the expense of their own health, obviously, right? Like they're playing this game full speed, and when they're playing full speed, injuries happen. And I hope he doesn't rush coming back, and I hope he's healthy. And if he isn't his old self, I just hope that he doesn't force it. There's no shame in walking away sometimes from the game that you love, even though it's probably pretty tough from these guys, But like if it's at the expense of your own health, man, like go live your life, go be with your family, um, and enjoy the money that you've made and the time that you've been in the NFL, an opportunity that not a lot of people get. So it's just like that. That's kind of the look that, like, the outlook that I have on it is like, hey, man, if you can't come back the same, like, I don't ever take it personally. Like, I know those injuries are really tough to come back from. It's really tough to battle them mentally, and not everybody is built like that to just come back and not be hesitant on the football field after you do something like that.
I mean, one thing I can say is, with it being at the end of the year, he still does have 1 year under contract with the Packers still. So it really becomes, when does he come back next year too? And I think that'll almost be like a little free trial and see, do we re-sign him at that point, or does he go to another NFL team? Worst case scenario here, obviously, is a David Bakhtiari type situation where all of a sudden turns out that he can't rehab it right. He needs, not only the rest of this year, but next year as well. And then possibly at that point, I think Green Bay just cuts ties with him. So this could be not saying I want this because I don't, because I do still see Christian Watson as a value for this offense. But this definitely could be the last game we ever saw with Christian Watson as a Green Bay Packer. And it's sad because he was kind of the guy who was going to be Devontae's replacement. He was that next generation Packer that was supposed to be a great, and I just don't think that ever happened due to injuries and just due to a lack of catching, if you will. But no,
Yeah, I mean,
definitely.
drops have been a big issue for the Packers this year, and I don't necessarily see the value in Christian Watson that you see. I see potential there, but I just haven't seen the product of that potential yet. I've seen glimpses of it in games, where he's had 100-yard games and caught touchdown passes, but I just haven't seen it consistently enough to believe that, he is uh, uh, somehow better than somebody that we would draft. Like I just haven't seen that yet. So and I think it's frustrating because we look at I look at teams around the league and I have to set my expectations realistically. And when I think of some other key draftees that even look at the Bears, right? Um, who's the newest kid? Adunze, right? So
Roma doing it.
so you look at that and Dunze's had an up and down year. The Bears have had an up and down year. So to gauge how good he really is in the first year is kind of it's difficult, right? And the Packers have been in a similar boat in terms of quarterback play and the team as a whole since the transition to Jordan Love, right? You have some of these veteran players that are leaving, going other places. You have new needs that are popping up as far as the team is concerned, positionally. And so I think it's tough to measure how good some of these players can actually be because we're not firing on all cylinders currently. We're just kind of game to game. Uh, and some games it might look really good, and then the next game it might look very spotty. And that's I think that's pretty much been the Packers' season thus far. It's just most of the time it's pretty decent, and there's been some moments where we've definitely shined and showed that we can compete. And then there's been other games, specifically in the division and all kinds of stuff, where it's hey, man, we're not doing a very good job competing when it comes down to where we need to compete, truly need to compete too, within the division. So that's a tough thing. How good are some of these guys? I don't know. I mean, Jaden Reed has been great, but then absolutely ghosted in some games. So I don't know. Daub seems to me like he is the go-to man. If I need a play on the field, I'm going to go to Daub's. That's what it seems. I like Malik Heath. I thought that he's had some key moments this year where I'm all right, well, he's got the hands, he can move. Um, I like Dontavian Wicks. It's just I don't know, man. None of those people to me, except for Daubs, I have put the check mark in the category for proven. Daubs has proven that he can be that guy week in and week out. I just don't know if anybody else really has that nod of approval for me yet. And I look around at these other organizations and even if you don't compare the quarterbacks necessarily Joe Burrow to Jordan Love because that's tough, man. Joey Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He's top 3 to me, but when you look at a Jamar Chase and T Higgins situation over there, we don't have that, man. We don't have that. And I'm not saying that Dobbs has to be Jamar Chase because he's not. But if we had another piece on the other side of the ball that was even a T Higgins to a Jamar Chase, that would be very helpful to have those options, and we just don't have that. And the teams that are very successful do have those kind of guys that are very versatile that they can throw to. I can name 1,000 for you right off the top of my head. Nico Collins and Tank Dell before he got hurt. And the list goes on, right? You have all these different guys that are very versatile in other franchises that make it very easy to spread the ball around. And I just don't think the Packers have that consistency yet with that, unless you disagree.
I mean, there's a lot said there, so I'll start it off with solely on Christian Watson. And just the way I value him in this offense is more as a decoy than as an actual wide receiver, just because his athleticism is so good that you have to respect it. And it does open up a lot of routes for, say, Wicks and, say, Dobbs and such. And that in the midfield, I think, helps out a lot. And deep shot wise, he's not really even the guy. It's happened a few times, but it's typically, I know, like Reed's been the guy that gets like the big long darts that are thrown his way. Like you said, I agree that there's been stretches that even Reed's been down. Romeo Dobbs he's an excellent wide receiver. I'd say that he's in anywhere in the league. He's definitely, if you had him as the number 2 wide receiver, I think you're happy. But I think athletically, he is limited still. And that's me being as negative as I can about him, because he's honestly one of my favorite Green Bay Packers. Like, in the pre-draft process, I've studied the draft for over a decade, and there's only been a handful of players that the Packers have ever got that were my guys, and Romeo Dobbs was one of them. So I love Dobbs, but you definitely, I don't see him in the offense, in any elite offense, being a number 1 guy. And I think that's where we have said it's been a spoil of riches with all the guys that we do have. But I think that the lack of development this year and the lack of anybody really grabbing that brass ring and going forward has been a little bit disappointing. I still see us as having a great young core, being great. But like you look at, for example, like the Tucker Craft. Tucker Craft this year has made a huge jump. Tucker Craft has become one of the best tight ends in this league. So the potential for any player in the Green Bay Packers offense was there. And you just had a lot of guys with dropping issues, with not getting consistently open. So I do agree that I do think that this offense does need to add. And I think that, unfortunately, the issue with Christian Watson going forward is, does he still have that level of athleticism going forward? And he might not. So I think in this year's draft, you do add another piece. You do go forward. And, you know, it's a sad thing to see an injury take a guy out like that. And also, I want to add one more thing that you said with Christian Watson. With I believe it was Jalen Johnson went down to pray to him. Do we know which God he was praying to? Because he could have been hexing that man. I know. We just assume that it's wholesome. That man could have just went down and started praying to the Dark Lord. He could have sacrificed Christian Watson's ACL. He went down, probably did a little chant there, started doing a little humming, maybe had like a little sparrow egg cracked on top of the ACL, sacrificed the ACL for the Bears to win the game.
Yeah, that's true. He could be into or learning some of that Chiefs magic that they have going on over there. So I guess you're right. It's not safe to assume that he was doing some kind of wholesome act. It might be fair to consider both things in
You
this
know, in the great
whole
words of
shebang.
Sublime, I don't practice Santeria. I ain't got no crystal ball. But you know, just saying, not saying. What is the NFL hiding? Because I saw a couple of angles, but how many camera angles have you seen, Kyle?
Maybe you should put it in slow motion and see if the ACL actually leaves his body at any point and just
And
floats up.
all I'm saying is, can we confirm that he did not crack an egg on his ACL? Did he sacrifice anything on top of his ACL? What type of
Perhaps,
chance was he mic'd up?
uh, you know, Dave, are you a Harry Potter fan at all?
I grew up in a Christian household. I was not allowed to watch, unfortunately.
All right, well, fair enough. Maybe there's a specific Harry Potter movie where Harry is competing in Quidditch, which I'm sure you've heard of, even if you're not a Harry Potter fan, and
Sure.
they think that is
Is
one of the.
Quidditch that little elf?
They think that it's. I'm just going to ignore you. They think that it's one of the teachers that's putting a spell on Harry during this game, and he's actually kind of reversing it. But either way, Harry's broom is just floating all around. That is what was happening to Christian's ACL during this whole thing. And if you were to look to the sideline, over yonder. I think that you would see Caleb Williams casting a spell from the sideline that absolutely demolished Christian Watson's ACL. We can't trust the Bears, Dave. They're a division rival.
Yeah. All I'm saying is, what did Christian Watson's ACL know about the Clintons?
That's true. Yeah, or the Epsteins.
These are the questions that no other Packer podcast asks.
That's true. Very true. We should probably watch our backs. All right. Speaking of the Christian Watson injury and the game in which it happened, I'm not going to say a whole lot in the Bears game, but I do have a bone to pick with the coaching, and you know this already, but um, I'll let you start on it, to be honest. I think the Packers should have won this game. Very sloppy overall. Just kind of seemed lethargic and like they weren't really, I don't know. I don't want to say prepared necessarily, but it seemed more like they're very lackadaisical. Like it's just like didn't matter if they won, didn't matter if they lost. And that might just be because of the playoff race being what it was, but this game still did have some value, so I would have liked to have seen us won. And if not for anything else, the rivalry of like beating them 12 games in a row would have been pretty nice. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. I'll let you give your piece on it, and then I have one bone to pick specifically with the end of the game.
I mean, the game was just kind of lackluster. It definitely nothing really screamed to me that the Packers were trying. And at the time, they did have seeding to still play for, but it kind of depends on what they wanted to play. Like if you told me that the Green Bay Packers wanted to play the Philadelphia Eagles, that's exactly the game I'd expect. If they wanted to stay away from the Eagles, then you sure could have fooled me because they came out there and they were so lackadaisical. They just showed that they didn't have energy. And I mean, they did take Jacobs out. Love got hurt. It's actually kind of crazy. He hit his funny bone and then he looked down and it went back. It's like, what's the deal with airline food? They knew the injury immediately. It was Dunzo, no more Funzo. So he was sitting on the sideline. Like you kind of addressed earlier, Malik Will's coming. Great effort. Malik Mania is still running wild. He was doing a great job, and he did everything that they needed to do to win that game. It was just situational defense at the end. I think that they kind of dared the Bears to, make that completion and down the ball. Because if you look, they were too afraid of the big shot, so they had their safeties playing 25 yards downfield at the end there, where instead of covering the middle of the field that they should have been covering. But at the end of the day, very, very bad game. Not impressive, but didn't mean anything. Big Mike still didn't go through with the Cowboys, and they lost to the Commanders. So no matter what the Packers would have done, it didn't affect their seeding. Like you said, the only thing that it really had to go for at that point was just the rivalry. But nowadays in the modern NFL, I think it's more rivalry for the fans and the players. They don't care. They're swapping jerseys after they're on podcasts with each other. Like that's not. It's not like back in the day where it's like you legitimately hated this man. If you saw him in public, it was on site. And that's just not the case in today's NFL anymore, which is understandable. It's just not. I don't think people just have that kind of edge anymore. You see it across a lot of different medias and such. Either it be basketball or baseball or wrestling. Like rivalries aren't what they used to be. And as a fan, the only thing I'm annoyed of now is Bear fans trying to act like they beat a Packers team that was actually trying when we clearly pulled two of our best players. But
Well, Dave, I'm going to touch on something you said. You said that it didn't mean anything, but to Caleb Williams, it meant a lot because he was running down the field and celebrating in the end zone like he had just won the Super Bowl after completely defying his prediction at the end of the season, or excuse me, at the beginning of the season, where he told his punter, well, you're not going to be punting much this year. The Bears have punted more than any other team in the NFL, Dave. So that's a pretty embarrassing stat in your first year to have the confidence to say you're not going to punt anymore and then go out and punt more than any other team. Any other team, Dave. Like, of all the terrible teams in the NFL, you punt the most. So,
Caleb Williams
I mean,
is a dweeb.
so I don't know what was going on there. It meant something to him. It may have meant nothing to you, but it meant something to Caleb Williams, and it certainly meant something to Santos, who was trying to Lambeau leap into the end zone. And thank goodness the Packers fans denied that nonsense. because that's just like, yeah, good for you. You got your kick blocked earlier in the season. No one cares. Like obviously, there's some frustration from the Packer fan side of things for the way that this game ended, but I have a rant for that as well. So obviously, we know the game was sloppy. We know the Packers weren't necessarily giving all they had here. We're just kind of coasting to the end of the season. It's a long season. There's injuries. People are banged up. Your quarterback's out. Christian Watson's got an injury. And this team, the Bears, is coming at you full fledged still. They have all their starters and they're trying to beat you. They want this very long winning streak to finally come to an end for the Packers. And they played like it. Are they are they some crazy competitor? No. Would it have still been a good game, I think, if all the Packers starters were in? Yeah, probably. But, like, we would have beat them. And I still stand by that. But I just think that they didn't have a good plan for a specific time frame in the game, which was that the Bears were up. The Packers, or actually, the game was tied. And actually, I think I'm wrong on that as well. I needed to study. Anyways, there was a minute 45 left in this game. DJ Moore had just fumbled the football, and the Packers recover, and immediately on the screen. Now, I'm not in the Packers, coaching booths, or I don't look at all the things they look at, but on the screen they showed field goal range after we recovered that ball. And we were literally like 2 yards from McManus's field goal range. So I was like, oh, we gained 2 yards. We milked the clock, game-winning field goal. And if you can get some extra yards along the way, get it, right? Like, as long as you keep the clock running, then you're fine. Instead, we go hurry up for 3 plays. We run 40 seconds off the clock. We lose 2 yards towards the end. So, like, we had a good gain in the running game. And then we rush back to the line for whatever reason, run no time off the clock. And then, we end up running 2 more plays, but we rush both of them. And instead of being like a gutsy call where we try to go get a first down, get it a little bit closer, still continue to milk the clock, make Chicago use its timeouts, all this other stuff, we take a timeout of our own with 58 seconds left, and now we're only like 2 yards down the field. It made no sense why we did what we did. And I think that, like, just speculating, I haven't heard anybody talk about it, but the reason that they take the time out there is to obviously decide if they're going to go for it or if they're going to kick the field goal. And, like, I understand the concept of that, but, like, you have a kicker who's been completely reliable for the time that he's spent in Green Bay. Trust the man and just go kick the game winner, especially if you're just going to play lackadaisical as it is, or passive. Like, you might as well just take the chance on if he makes it, he makes it, and if he doesn't, he doesn't. We just walk away either way. Like,
Yeah,
we're
the only way you don't trust McManus is if he's on a plane coming back from England.
That's correct. Like, and he's not, right? So, like,
Yeah,
let's just
not the
hang our head.
situation at all.
Like, I think that's a good ending to the game, is like just hang our head on the kicker, give him the nod, because he's proven that he can perform. And they did not do that. Instead, we give Chicago the ball back after a long field goal. He makes the field goal, right? But, like, too much time left in the clock. And then you give Caleb Williams the opportunity to go down, use his legs, buy time, complete passes. And again, we're just, like, on the defensive side of the ball, we're just way too lax. We're playing end zone defense or prevent defense when all they need to do is go 15 yards down the field and kick.
Yeah.
Like, it just made no sense why we played the kind of defense we played. It looked like elementary school out there. Like, it was just like, it was so terribly run. And it was really a fan moment for me where, like, like, usually we're just like delusional as fans. We're like, like, oh, he needs to do this. But, like, I myself could never do that. But, like, in that specific situation, I kept thinking to myself, like, unbelievable that, like, I from my couch understand that you milk this clock. You take this down to the lowest amount of time, make them use their timeouts, you kick the game winner, and if it's not a game winner, you leave as little time possible for this team to go do anything else to you so we win and continue this streak. That is 100% a coaching deficiency or complete failure on the Packers' part for the end of this game. Completely mismanaged the game. It was embarrassing to watch. Lucky that it didn't actually mean anything when it came to, you know, like when it comes down to it, like the Packers were in regardless. But like they're
Mhm.
very lucky that that didn't have some kind of worse repercussions for them. As like if that was like a putting the end of the season, people would have been distraught with that. So I don't know what happened there. Hopefully they get it together. And I'm going to move on from that after saying that because like that is probably the most mismanaged game I've seen all season by the Packers.
I would also add the fact of I don't think that last drive with the Bears should have really happened because there was that play that it was intentional grounding and it was clearly intentional grounding by Caleb Williams when he got sacked and got rid of it. And there wasn't anybody within 10 miles of where he threw it. I think that should have been a runoff. That's ticky tacky though, and ticky tacky it's kind of wacky. Whatever, it happens. But Caleb Williams is a dweeb. I want to say that again. Caleb Williams is a dweeb. The way he reacted like he just won the Super Bowl, very, very silly. I kind of see him as a Russell Wilson type. Like if you were to tell me that Caleb Williams was doing high knees on a plane or painting his fingernails while doing high knees, I would not be surprised.
No, I wouldn't be surprised by that either. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what comes of the Chicago Bears. I talked about earlier in the season, we predicted like who our greatest rival is going to be in the division going forward, and we both had different thoughts on that. And it depends on a couple of different factors, obviously, like the quarterbacks and how consistent our teams plays, and how deep they go in the playoffs and how do they bounce back next year. We'll see, but I think to the Bears' credit, they will be a good football team next year. They have to improve on this year, to be honest with you. Like I don't think that they could possibly be worse than this year, given everything that's happened. If they get a really good head coach in there, it could be a scary program. So we'll see. We'll see what
Yeah,
they do. I think Ben Johnson's going to be the move for them, and we'll just kind of see what happens from there. So
no Big Mike.
uh, I don't know, man. I don't see like the appeal with Mike Vrabel, but we'll see.
No, Michelle Obama.
Fair enough.
Uh,
um, all right, so the Packers, Dave, they finished 11-6 officially on the year. Now, crazy stat, something that maybe we won't have to say again, or hopefully for some time. 1-5 in the division, only beating the Bears this year once. So we split the series with the Bears. We lose both games to the Vikings. We lose both games to the Lions. We still secure the 7 seed in the playoffs. The question that I have, Dave, is should Packers fans be worried about this 1-5 divisional? Are these 1-5 divisional standings from this year, or is this something that like, hey, this too shall pass? We will have better performances. Are you worried? What would you tell Packers fans?
I would tell Packers fans that you look at where they're at in their current developmental process. Last year, you expected nothing from this team. This year, you had more expectations. But I mean, how many people realistically think the Packers are winning Super Bowl this year? I do because I'm an optimistic fan. But I think in a national eye, like nobody's really giving Green Bay a chance at this point. And you look at like how Lions were in their development with Dan Campbell. Every year they've gotten better, and just like the Green Bay Packers now, what with Jordan Love, now we have gotten better this year. We've won, was it 2 more games than we did last year? It'll only go up from here. I think that this team, you add a few more pieces on the defense, you possibly get another wide receiver. You have another year of development with your players. Jordan Love's not going anywhere. So it's just continuing to build, continue to move on. Obviously, after we get the Super Bowl ring this year, we'll come out, we'll be 15-0, 16-0, 17-0, and I'll show all the haters. I'll, stunt on them, as the kids say. But in just for this year, we just weren't there. We lost a lot of close games to a lot of really, really good teams. I'd be more concerned if every single team like the Lions, the Vikings had a record kind of like the Bears, but they don't. You have two teams that the Lions won 15 games and the Vikings won 14 games. It's not like these are like chumps. They're not bad teams. You lost to really, really good teams. And as much as I hate to say it, they're good teams because I absolutely hate the NFC North. I hate every team but the Green Bay Packers, and I want to see them get crushed every single year. Just wasn't our year. It didn't happen. You know what? We just move on because in the grand scheme, it doesn't affect anything. It's not like they're going to look at our divisional record now and be like, nope, you know what? 1-5, we're going to scratch you from the playoffs. No, we're still in the playoffs. Right now, everybody's 0-0. Divisional doesn't care. Like, it doesn't matter. If you look at the year we won the Super Bowl, do you know who won the divisional, the NFC North, the year we won the Super Bowl, Cal? It was the Chicago
Uh,
Bears. The fact that it took you that long to even think, like, that shows how little the division really matters. If we make a run, if we beat the teams that we need to beat and win the Super Bowl, that's what we're going to care about. 10 years down the line, nobody's saying, "Oh man, do you remember that NFC North title in 2014? You know, oh man, that was something." No, you're going to just remember how it ended the playoffs. We're at the point that we need to be. We made it to the dance. Move forward. You need to beat the Eagles. You need to go 1-0 every week. You need to be a dog because if you look at a cat kennel, Kyle, you know what they got? No trophies because you need dogs for championships.
that's a new one. I've never heard that.
I said it like 5 weeks ago on the podcast.
Well, I wasn't listening.
Ah, that's fair.
um, yeah, I don't know. I take kind of a neutral stance on the should we be worried thing at this point. You know, it depends, man. It really depends to me. Like it is. I think it depends mostly for me on the team's progress, like you're saying, and you said that at the beginning of your last little rant there. But you know, like I think it depends on the progress the team makes. If we are just like the same backers team come next year, then like yeah, I would be worried because I think that some of these teams are going to continue to make improvements, and that's what scares me. Um, you know, and like for the foreseeable future for some of these other franchises like the Detroit Lions or the Minnesota Vikings, like Minnesota has a QB cooking. So who knows what they're going to do with him? And there's been a lot of talks around JJ McCarthy and what they're going to do now with him, or like should they trade him away and keep Darnold? Like that's absurd to me. I don't know why you would trade him. I think that you would just cook him and let him come up under Darnold right now until Darnold cools down a little bit, which inevitably probably he will. Um, but like a trade would be absurd. It would be like the best thing for the Green Bay Packers ever if they were to just like boot McCarthy and be like, yeah, like Sam Darnold's the guy, and then like Sam Darnold just tanks and they're like, oh no. But you know, we'll see. You know, like what happens with the Vikings. Jared Goff, like I think the Lions are only good as long as Jared Goff is good, because as soon as they bring in somebody else to be that replacement, like I don't know if they're as great. They're a very good team, very talented. I think they'll still remain at the top of the division, but I don't. Do I think they're going to be like a 1-loss or 2-loss team every year? No, absolutely not. This is a special year for the NFC North. I'm just enjoying it, and it's kind of like watching Big Ten teams in the college football playoff. Now, granted, I know you're a Notre Dame fan, so I know that you have something to say about this,
Oh, do I?
um, I do tend to cheer for Big Ten teams. You know, when it comes playoff time, just because it's the division in which the Badgers play, and I have a loyalty to that division. So I'm just kind of enjoying it. You know, I hope Ohio State is currently smacking Texas. I have no idea what the score is, but um, yeah, I'm just hoping that the consistency in the NFC North stays, and that we are still the division not to be messed with, and that people fear this division, because it seems like across the entire NFL, as far as fan bases are concerned, that people are acknowledging the fact that the NFC North is probably the best division. I've even heard people say of all time, which I think, I don't know, I'd have to really dive deep to figure out if that's true or not, or if that has a valid argument or not. But certainly in like recent years, I can't think of a division that's as good as this division is. So, and are the Packers like the top tier of that division? Like, I don't know. Like we're certainly contenders. We've only lost those 5 division games. We've still lost by a total combined under like 25 points. So like, it's not like we're getting blown out. It's not like we're getting embarrassed. Like, it sucks to lose, and like I don't like losing, even from my couch. But I certainly think that like we're competing where we need to compete. It's just like, are we fully there yet, and are we equal with some of these franchises that are beating us? And like the answer to that is no. Like we do not have all the pieces Detroit has. We do not have all the pieces that Minnesota has. And if we did, we'd be in a much better spot because I think Jordan Love is better than Sam Darnold is. I think Jordan Love is better than Jared Goff is. Like I think that our offense, like like if I was to break it down very technically, I'd say like our receiving core is not as good as either of those teams, and our defense is far inferior to both of those defenses. Not far off of the Vikings, but far from the Detroit Lions when they're healthy. So, like, I mean, if we can kind of adjust that and make it a little bit more even, a level playing field for next year, I think that you have a different division. Still very competitive, but it won't show the Packers as being 1-5. So, like, I think that yes, you can be worried if nothing changes, but I think that you can count on the division being much closer in the Packers' record to improve next year, should they make some very, very good offseason and draft acquisitions. That's kind of my stance on this whole, should we be worried thing, is like, yeah, maybe, but also maybe not. Like, it just kind of depends on where we're at next year, and that's kind of the fun of being a fan, is we get to watch it unfold. So we'll see.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree on some of those points that you had there. It's one of those things. But like I said, now none of it matters. It all just goes forward because this next week, or in a couple days for us when we're recording, and I don't know, you as the fan, whenever you're watching this, maybe possibly even after the Philly Packer game, maybe the predictions we make are stupid and you'll laugh at us. I don't know. Mr. T, probably talking to you. But
Um, so we know, as we mentioned, Dave, we're the 7th seed for these playoffs, and we have a game at Philly at 3:30 p.m. on Sunday. Um, we're almost right at our hour cap, so we've done a good job getting everything knocked off this list today. But talk to me about Philly. Obviously, we talked about a few weeks back. We talked about the playoff picture and what that would look like. Philly was a team that you mentioned at that time that really you didn't want to see in the playoffs. Is that still something that holds true? Are you a little bit worried? And then I'm going to need your prediction at the end of it all.
I'm a little bit less worried than I was a few weeks ago. They still have an amazing offensive line. They still have an amazing defensive line. Uh, the biggest thing that's kind of more of a relief for me is the fact that Jalen Hurts has been out in concussion protocol for the last 2 weeks. So realistically, he's going to be a little bit cold. I might get bit in the butt for this. Maybe he goes out there and he passes 4 touchdown passes and looks amazing against the Packers. But I'm hoping that his time out, he doesn't come back and light the world on fire. Obviously, this team runs through Saquon Barkley. No pun intended. Uh, it's going to be one of those things that our defensive line is going to have to step up. You're not going to be playing bad teams in the playoffs. Eagles are a very, very good team. They won 14 games for a reason. If you want to win a Super Bowl, you're going to beat them. If you don't want to bring that dog mentality, then you're going to get run over. And I think this is really going to show the heart of the Green Bay Packers here. Last year, you were playing with house money. This year, you could argue they still are because I doubt anybody's picking the Packers, but I don't personally feel like it was last year. I feel like this isn't house money anymore. You have to go out there and you need to show heart. If you have Saquon Barkley run for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, you're not showing heart. If you have Jalen Hurts go out there and, run for a touchdown and throw for 3 more, you're not showing heart. If you have A.J. Brown just going out there and dominating you, if Carrington Valentine can't do anything, Eric Stokes gets literally murdered on that field, you're not showing any heart. Um, that's what this game is going to show. Do the Green Bay Packers have heart? Because they've kind of limped into the playoffs. The last 2 losses, they haven't looked good. They've looked lackadaisical. They look like there's no sense of urgency. This is where the Packers have to show. This is going to be what springs forward their potential dynasty. You start it here, you start going, you could really make a run of this because it's a young team. If you go in there and you just don't show, hope for next year. But it's going to leave a really, really bad taste in my mouth as a Packer fan. That being said, I'm still going to go with the Green Bay Packers because I believe in them. I believe in Josh Jacobs. I believe in Jordan Love. I think this team has a lot of pieces that they can compete with Philly. Are they going to steamroll them? No. It's not going to be close. I think that there's even times where we might give up as Packer fans and the Packers might have to come back. They might be up a couple scores on us and we have to show what we're made of. At the end of the day, though, I'm going to go Packers 31, Philadelphia Eagles 30. I think it comes down to a field goal at the end. We just get the ball. I think it's going to be incredibly close. I really, really believe in this team. I would love to see the Packers win this game.
Well, Dave, what we can find in common this week is that we both want the Packers to win. And I will gladly surrender the score prediction to you should you be right. However, you will not be, and here's why. People have been making comparisons all week, Dave, to the Dallas game. People are saying, oh, can Green Bay come in and can they upset the Philly team like they did to Dallas last year? And the problem with that argument is that we are not the same Green Bay team at the end of the season that we were last year. Like you said, and I'm glad that you brought it up, the Packers have been very lackadaisical over the last 2 weeks. And specifically the Bears game, like from the, I don't know if it's just carried over from losing to the Vikings the second time because they really poured it all out there, or what. But the Bears game was rough, man, very rough. And then now you have some additional injuries, and you're not coming into this game as the hot team that finished the season on fire. You're coming into this playoff game against a very good football team as the team that is kind of struggling and limping, like you said, into the playoffs. So this is not the same Packers team as was really hot coming into Dallas and just shocked the world. This is a Packers team that has taken some blows from division games this year and, has even just struggled to prove themselves when they needed to lately. So this is another game in which, like, hey, we're asking you guys to step up to the plate. We're asking you guys to show out when it matters. And unfortunately, those games have not gone well for the Green Bay Packers this year. We have started slow. We have consistently been a second half football team and gotten down and had to battle back. It's very, very hard for me to trust that the Packers will not also do that thing here. I love this team. You're right. Like, we have that in common, or we wouldn't be sitting here talking for an hour for 4 people to look at this, right? Like, we love this team, and we want them to do well. And I don't want anybody to ever get it twisted as far as my predictions go. I love this team, and when I fully see what I need to see on the football field to predict them to win, I have done so. But unfortunately, I have to go off of what I have seen in trends for the Green Bay Packers. And unfortunately, this week, I think this is a task that is very, very tall. I think that we get down early. Saquon prevails, in this game, whether that's 90 yards and 3 touchdowns, or whether that's 200 yards and no touchdowns. Like, I see him prevailing either way, on the ground, because that's just what he does, and he's been that good this season. He also didn't get to compete in the last regular season game this year for Philly and break the NFL record for most rushing yards in a season, which, if it was me, no matter what I say to the media, I would have a problem with. So I would be looking to come out and prove myself that I could have done that against a team that has been fairly weak against the run. So it's tough, man. Do I think Jalen's going to light up our defense? No. Is it possible he throws a couple dimes and, has a good game passing? Yeah, absolutely. But I think Saquon's the problem. If we come out and limit him and we really are on our game and like you said, like, if we come out with that attitude and that heart, then yes, is it possible? Absolutely. But we have to be on our A game here. And just based off the last few weeks and the games where we've been asked to step up to the plate, I just have a tough time seeing if that's going to happen. So my prediction for this week is probably something similar to what we saw in the Minnesota game where we're down, maybe 10 at half or maybe even a little bit more than that. We have to battle back, and it's just a complete brawl in the second half. And like we know, man, like these games can come down to the wire if that's the case. And hopefully for the Packers it is, and we get that victory. But I'm saying the Philly defense is going to hold strong. We just haven't been consistent enough for me to think that we're going to go out and to Philly and get a victory. So I'm saying it's going to be a 31-20 victory for the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Packers will have a great offseason and we'll rebuild it and get back better next year.
Ye of little faith, Kyle. Ye of little faith. Hopefully I'm gloating to you next week.
I have faith in the fact that we have definitely shocked me before. And to be honest, like I thought the Dallas team last year was better than Philly is this year. And we've already competed against Philly this year, so who knows how much that Philly team has changed from week 1 of the season to now seeing them again in the playoffs. So, and that's for Matt LaFleur and everybody to dissect and try to make, adjustments to and, figure out where they're weak and where they're vulnerable. And Matt LaFleur is one of the best coaches in the league at doing that. So, like, I have faith in the fact that it can work very well. It's just, if I'm going off of what I have seen recently, it's just very hard to, I think, overcome that.
Yeah, and we also don't have Narvu Dog anymore to miss any field goals. Instead, we have a Predator.
That's true. One could say he's... Never mind.
Yeah, that's probably for the best. On that note, Kyle, let's wrap it up. If you're watching this, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Got a couple cool things coming up with the channel. Going to do a lot of draft content. I'm already studying tape. Might have a new cool intro song, too, coming up. The 4 people that are watching don't care, but we do. We do. That's cool for us.
More editing for me, I suppose, huh?
Hey, I don't care about your time, so. All right, buddy. I'll catch you later.
All right, bud.
All right.